So I'm going to go over the herringbone demo one more time. So what we did is they found the middle of the floor here, okay? The center of your parquet pattern is right in the center of this board and in the center of it this direction and this direction, okay? So it comes to a point right there. So that would be technically in the very middle of the floor. That's going to give you balanced pieces at both ends of the floor. So the way we find our lines, so we have our primary line, our center line here. Okay, this is the middle of the floor, right here. So what we've done is we took the diagonal measurement, and this is the part I think a lot of you guys were kind of getting a little confused about. The diagonal measurement across here, and we divide that by 4. Okay, this was 4 and just under 3/16, which left us an increment of 4 equaling to 1 and roughly a 16th. Okay, so these numbers right here from your center line, this distance right here is going to be that 1 and a 16th. Okay, we've also talked about not having to use a tape measure. Okay, because sometimes those numbers can get very muddied. Anytime you divide a number that we're already using fractions on, and then you divide that into fourths, you end up with more fractions. So my biggest concern when we're doing this, as fine a line as possible, but if you lay this out and you find your center point of your board, and you can actually mark where those 2 points end up, snap that line, and then you can measure that. You can do that at both ends if you need to. Okay, it does alleviate the need of herringbone layout without having to break those numbers down and be as detailed or as perfect with those. This is real world. We don't always end up with exactly on that line. It should stay on that line. If there's any deviation, I want that deviation to stay consistent from one end to the other. A fatter chalk line is just more difficult to see. So as we transfer those lines, you get a little more deviation just because of the width of your chalk line. So if we could have this laser thin every single time, we're going to be able to stay very accurate all the way across the floor. The only other measurement we need to come up with is going to be our working lines, our A lines, as they keep transferring across the floor, and those will go both directions. That number will also be exactly the same, both directions. And that is the distance basically from this point in the square as it goes across the floor to this point. Okay, we've measured that already if we had more pieces here, and that came out to 12 and just under 3/4, right? So the distance between this working line and this working line was 12 3/4 inch, and it was just under that, so I'll call it a minus. So I'll make that mark. That'll go on both sides at both ends. Those lines are parallel to your working line, and you snap those lines. All your points should end up on that line or very close to it. If your line is off a little bit, and you start deviating, this is human error involved sometimes. So maybe you measured plus, 12 3/4 plus, so you went a 16th heavy on that side. So that's going to be off by 1/8 of an inch. Now this is what, 16 feet wide. So that's not very much over 16 feet, but you may see that line deviate off your working line. Okay, so if you have to, stop, grab a chalk line, and pull it nice and tight down your points. You don't need to snap it, but just look at it and see where all those points are at. If they're lining up straight, then your working line is probably off. To figure out our starting point down here, we measured increments off of the center to the width of this diagonal, the length of this diagonal here. So I was able to bring the entire floor, instead of starting in the middle, I was able to bring the starting point back here so we can lay this entire thing, and then we can turn around there and come back on both sides and be done.